So I grew up in a little coal camp in the very southern part of the state. My coal camp was in Mercer County. Pastor Larry's was in McDowell County, just right over the mountain, but we never knew each other because we were in different school districts. And so in my coal camp in Mercer County, we were very isolated. It was very poverty stricken, no jobs, limited transportation, no health care. And so, us kids growing up in the 80s, we really were on our own, us and our parents. And, this coal camp is still there today, and so is Pastor Larry's. So, these people still live in these camps. So, there's a lot of people that are still trapped in poverty. So, when we think about isolation and poverty and the effect that that has on young people, lots of things that young kids, youth have in more urban settings like Morgantown, they don't have in these really small, isolated communities. Morgantown is nothing like the rest of the state. It truly is nothing like it. So when we think about disparity, we know that comes with lack of education, very limited jobs, poverty, bigotry, fire and brimstone teaching. And all of these things that make up a really a disparaged community, we see in isolated parts of the state of West Virginia. And it's since the 80s, very little has changed. Still no jobs, still poverty, still isolation, still no transportation, still no health care in these really rural communities. So when I was growing up in my coal camp, the name of my coal camp is McComas, there was a church, and that church was very much charismatic, and the preaching was fire and brimstone. I can remember sitting on the steps at our old holler home on the hill, and someone from the church hollering up to us and telling my mother that because she didn't take us to church, that we would all burn in hell. And I can remember thinking at 8 years old two things. One, they're crazy because my mom is the best person I know. Two, I don't want to have anything to do with them ever. And so actually, the devil used that in against me to where I didn't want to have anything to do with church. There was so much church hurt from that fire and brimstone preaching. Now, think about me as a kid in that holler. There was all kinds of us kids. But also in that holler was one kid who was very different from the rest of us. This kid was assigned a boy at birth, but we all knew this was not a boy. This child loved to play Barbies and babies, and they spent time at our home. And as a matter of fact, in the summertime, this child was at our home more than they were at their own home. We played with them. To us, this was who they were. The same thing with my mother. My mother really supported this kid and really showed us what it meant to care for someone who is different from us. So even in a coal camp community where the other kids in that holler were really treating this kid badly, my mother showed us how to not do that. And, as time went on and we see that, how the other kids were treating this child, we were so glad that they were with us at our home. So the summer days in the coal camp included, all the moms stayed home and we rode bikes, built forts, playhouses, basketball, but we were isolated in that community. So there wasn't a way for us to get out and see what was happening anywhere else. The tent that you see here, this was something that my mother built for us every week. It was over the clothesline, bricks on the ends of it, and that allowed us a place to play, like a really easy playhouse. So our friend, different from others, bullied, abused, marginalized, but this child was so full of the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, self-control. way beyond what the rest of us kids were. And we could see that clearly in this child, that they were so kind and so nice and so gentle, even though the rest of the community viewed them as very different. So my mother's name is Cordy, and this is a picture of us. That's me there in the green dress in the middle. I am the middle child, which people tell me they can tell. Uh, and that's us at Christmas. So my mom grew up even in more isolation than I did, even farther back in the mountain than I did. She didn't finish middle school. She lived an isolated life, grew up in poverty, never learned to drive, never had a job. She's still alive, and she's still the best person that I know. So my mom and all of us girls together, she showed us a view of how to treat other people even when she was not well equipped. She was isolated, she had no education. The thing that I had forgotten about my mother was, I feel like God brought back to me in a memory when our own children, my husband and I's children, our oldest came out as gay and non binary, and our middle child is transgender. And we laid in the bed for weeks, crying, afraid. What was the world going to do to these kids? Not that they were gay and trans, but that we were afraid for them. And what God brought back to my memory was that when my mom would walk this child home, so when it was the end of the day and they were going home, my mom would take the kid by one hand and she would have a brick in the other. And she would walk up that holler and she would threaten any older boy, anybody who would be mean to that kid. She would say, "Don't even open your mouth." And she would get this kid right to their door. And so I think what God was telling me through this is that my mom had equipped me not only to be an advocate for other marginalized young people, but because I was going to be the parent of two. And I think that that memory that came back, because then I asked my mom, I'm like, "Is this real?" And she's like, "Yeah, I had to." She said it was really bad in the holler for this kid. And so my mom was able to implant in me the reality that this is how you treat people. This is my mom and our oldest when he was 6 years old. This we had a home in the holler. We still have this home, and she was walking him home from the school bus. And so, you know, my mom has never gone to church, and a lot of that is because of her own church hurt. But she has a very strong faith, and she exhibits the fruits of the Spirit in all aspects of her life. So let's talk about another case in point. So let's talk about Mistress Dranafield Bouget. She was from a region that we now call Albania. Her and her husband had 3 children, Aga, Lazar, and Agnes. And this woman was uneducated, and she couldn't own land. She couldn't, most of the time have a job. And she had 3 children when her husband was poisoned. And as she was trying to raise these children, the community knew her very well for her deep faith, her generosity, and her commitment to help the poor and the sick. And so she was well known in the community. But even after her husband died and she had nothing, she had no money, she had very little food, every evening she had one stranger at the house who was homeless or food insecure, and she would feed them food. She would feed them dinner, even though she had very little. Her and her 3 children would share their dinner. So, a quote that has been remembered as coming from her is, "Never eat a single mouthful unless you're sharing it with others." So this was a very giving, fruitful woman. To even when she was not well equipped, she was still able to give of what she had to support other people, which was beautiful. So, who was this lady? She was the mother of Mother Teresa. So you can see the world knows Mother Teresa, right? We know of her being in the ditches in Calcutta with the people suffering with leprosy, with the homeless, with the destitute, with the isolated, with the marginalized. And what most people don't realize is that her mother was a part of instilling these beliefs and this life that Mother Teresa went on to live. And so, in the work that Mother Teresa did, she was very much out in the community. She had a heart for young people. She mentored a lot of young people. And so, in her journals, she talks about how we have to really wrap our hands around the youth and role model for them. And that's what her mother did for her. So, it's not what we say, it really is what we do as parents. It's what our kids see us do. Me and my husband do not consider ourselves to be great parents. We're average parents. But the things that we're seeing our kids do in their lives now helps us to see that they did pick up on some of the great qualities that our parents and grandparents instilled in us. Our oldest is in medical school, our middle is in nursing school, and they have a heart for the environment, for nature. They love animals. They care for other people. And so those are the things that they picked up on from us from generation to generation. And so when we think about the ways that we, as a church, as a body of Christ, can impact people, it's the youth. It really is. It's the people who have been hurt by church, who do not believe that there's a place for them in the body of Christ. I love it when Pastor Larry preaches about prevenient grace. It is my favorite sermon to listen to because without prevenient grace, I would not have overcome the hurt that I experienced in the coal camp from church people. And it was through that prevenient grace that I gained clarity that behaviors like that are not from God, they are from people. So, when you think about the role that Suncrest United Methodist has, I don't know if you all have been over to Old Drummond, but on the wall at Old Drummond, there's pictures of the history of the church and stories and examples. But there's one that sticks in my mind. And in the beginning of this church, in like the 1800s, early 1900s, there were children in the surrounding neighborhoods who would not come to this church. And the reason they wouldn't come is because they didn't have shoes. And so the Sunday school teachers and the leadership of this church made a decision. Everybody would be barefoot on Sundays. And when they did that, what happened was the kids were no longer afraid to come. And so instead of trying to make the children who had no shoes wear shoes, instead of saying, you're different, so we want you to be like us, this church in the beginning said, we're not going that way. We're going to meet them where they are. And I truly believe that that's the Spirit of God bringing about that process early in this church has continued to make this church a very outward facing congregation that are looking for ways to seek out the marginalized and help people. And it was that 2015 proclamation of affirmation that this church posted on its website saying, you don't got to be like us, come on, you're welcome here, that gave our family a safe place to land when our children were no longer welcome at our previous church. So I hope that the examples that I've given you today of my life in poverty and growing up in isolation, how my mother shaped me and prepared me to be the mother of genderqueer children, and also the work that Mother Teresa's mom did in instilling in her this faith and this belief, and to know that this church, in its infancy, was already looking for ways to include the marginalized. Thank you.